It was just another quiet Saturday morning in the small town of Ridgewood, where everyone knew each other by name. The air was crisp, and the streets were calm as Officer Marcus Kane pulled into the parking lot of the local supermarket. He had just finished his night shift, which had been unusually slow compared to the usual hustle of calls about noise complaints or minor disturbances. As he stepped out of his patrol car, he stretched his arms and took a deep breath, feeling grateful for a rare moment of peace. Marcus wasn't exactly what you'd call a people person. He was serious, disciplined, and always followed the rules to the letter. His colleagues respected him for his dedication, but some found him a little too rigid. Still, no one could deny that Marcus cared deeply about keeping Ridgewood safe. Over the years, he had earned a reputation as someone who didn't hesitate to step in when trouble brewed, whether it was breaking up bar fights or chasing down shoplifters. But today, all he wanted was to pick up a few groceries before heading home to relax. Inside the supermarket, the fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, casting a bright glow over aisles stocked with fresh produce, canned goods, and household essentials. Shoppers moved leisurely through the store, chatting with friends or browsing items on their lists. It seemed like any other ordinary day, until something caught Marcus's eye. As he wandered toward the dairy section, he noticed a woman standing near the checkout counters. At first glance, there was nothing particularly unusual about her appearance. She wore jeans, a plain t-shirt, and sunglasses, even though she was indoors. That last detail struck Marcus as odd. Sunglasses inside? Why would anyone do that unless they were trying to hide something? He slowed his pace, pretending to examine a carton of milk while discreetly observing the woman. She appeared nervous, glancing around frequently and shifting her weight from one foot to the other. Her hands hovered near her bag as if she were preparing to grab something or maybe stash something away. To Marcus, it looked suspicious. Was she casing the place? Planning a robbery? Or worse? His instincts kicked in immediately. Years of training told him not to ignore his gut feelings. After all, countless criminals had been caught because an officer noticed something amiss. A twitch, a furtive glance, a misplaced item. Marcus tightened his grip on the shopping basket in his hand and began walking slowly toward the woman, his eyes locked on her every move. Unbeknownst to Marcus, the woman he was now scrutinizing was none other than FBI Special Agent Laura Hayes. Laura had been sent to Ridgewood on a high-priority assignment involving counterfeit currency operations that had recently surfaced in the area. This wasn't her first time undercover, and she prided herself on blending seamlessly into her surroundings. Today, however, she hadn't expected to encounter any complications during such a mundane task as picking up coffee creamer. Laura hadn't even realized she was being watched until she felt a presence behind her. Turning slightly, she saw a man approaching, his posture tense, his expression unreadable. Something about the way he carried himself made her uneasy. Then she noticed the badge clipped to his belt. A police officer. What did he want with her? Had someone tipped him off about her investigation? Before either of them could say a word, Marcus stopped a few feet away, his hand instinctively resting on the holster of his gun. "Ma'am," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the ambient murmur of the supermarket. "Can I have a word with you?" Laura turned fully to face him, her heart rate quickening. She recognized the tone in his voice. It was authoritative, commanding, but instead of complying right away, she hesitated. Reaching into her bag, she prepared to pull out her credentials, hoping to diffuse the situation quickly. Unfortunately, her action only heightened Marcus's suspicion. To him, the movement looked deliberate, almost calculated. In his mind, this wasn't just a casual shopper anymore. This was someone who might pose a threat. Without thinking twice, Marcus drew his weapon and pointed it directly at her. "Don't move," he barked, his voice echoing through the store. Customers nearby froze in shock, unsure of what was happening. Some dropped their baskets and backed away, while others whipped out their phones to record the unfolding drama. For Laura, those few seconds felt like an eternity. She froze mid-motion, her fingers still clutching the edge of her bag. Her mind raced as she processed the surreal scene. A police officer, with his gun trained on her, had mistaken her for a criminal. Out of the corner of her eye, She noticed shoppers filming the encounter, their expressions a mix of fear and fascination. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on her. Here she was, a seasoned FBI agent tasked with protecting the public, and now she was the one in danger. For a brief moment she considered explaining herself, but the gravity of the situation stopped her. With a loaded gun pointed at her chest, she knew better than to make any sudden moves. Instead, she raised her hands slowly, palms facing outward, and spoke in a steady voice. "I'm with the FBI," she said, enunciating each word carefully. "Please let me show you my badge." But Marcus didn't lower his weapon. His training screamed at him to stay cautious, to verify her claim before assuming anything. Yet deep down, doubt gnawed at him. Could this really be an FBI agent? Or was this some clever ploy to distract him? Either way, the clock was ticking, and the longer the standoff continued, the more volatile the situation became. What neither of them realized in that moment was how drastically their lives were about to change. For Marcus, this seemingly routine trip to the supermarket would soon spiral into a nightmare of legal battles, public scrutiny, and personal reflection. For Laura, it would serve as a stark reminder of the fragile line between trust and suspicion within law enforcement. And for the people of Ridgewood, it would become a story they'd talk about for years to come. A cautionary tale of how quickly things can go wrong when communication breaks down. Though neither Marcus nor Laura knew it yet, this single encounter would leave an indelible mark on both their careers and force them to confront hard truths about themselves and the world they served. As Marcus stood there, his gun still pointed at Laura, the tension in the air was palpable. Every second felt like an eternity, and the once peaceful supermarket had transformed into a scene of chaos and confusion. Shoppers who had been casually browsing moments ago were now frozen in place, their eyes darting between Marcus and Laura, unsure of what to do or how to react. Some clutched their shopping carts tightly, while others instinctively moved toward the exits, trying to put as much distance between themselves and the unfolding drama as possible. Laura, despite her years of experience in high-pressure situations, couldn't help but feel a wave of fear wash over her. She had faced dangerous criminals before, but this was different. This wasn't a suspect or a threat. It was a fellow law enforcement officer, someone who was supposed to be on her side. Yet here she was, staring down the barrel of his gun, her heart pounding in her chest. Her mind raced as she tried to process how things had escalated so quickly. All she had been doing was reaching for her badge, a simple action that should have resolved the misunderstanding within seconds. But now, it seemed like every move she made only deepened the tension. Marcus, on the other hand, was operating purely on instinct. His training had drilled into him the importance of staying vigilant, especially when dealing with potential threats. To him, Laura's behavior, her sunglasses indoors, her nervous glances, her sudden movement toward her bag, had all the hallmarks of someone up to no good. He told himself he was just doing his job, protecting the public from harm. But even as he held his ground, a small part of him began to question whether he was overreacting. Was this really necessary? Could this woman truly be a danger to anyone? The silence between them was broken only by the faint hum of the supermarkets, overhead lights, and the distant murmur of panicked shoppers whispering to one another. Finally, Laura spoke again, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. "Officer," she said, keeping her hands raised, "I'm telling you, I'm with the FBI. Let me show you my credentials. I can explain everything." Her words hung in, the air unanswered. Marcus hesitated, his finger hovering near the trigger of his gun. He knew he couldn't just take her word for it. Protocol demanded that he verify her identity first. But the longer he kept his weapon trained on her, the more unstable the situation became. Other shoppers were starting to gather around, forming a loose circle around the two of them. Some whispered nervously, while others pulled out their phones and began recording the encounter. The flash of camera lights and the soft clicks of video recordings added another layer of pressure to an already tense standoff. One shopper, a middle-aged man holding a loaf of bread, stepped forward cautiously. "Hey, is everything okay here?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. Marcus turned his head briefly, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the newcomer. "Stay back," he snapped, his tone sharp enough to make the man recoil instantly. The crowd fell silent again, watching wide-eyed as the drama unfolded. Meanwhile, Laura tried to remain calm, though her mind was racing. She knew that escalating the situation further could lead to disastrous consequences, not just for herself but for everyone in the store. If Marcus fired his weapon, even accidentally, innocent lives could be put at risk. She needed to find a way to de-escalate things, to get through to him before it was too late. Taking a slow, deliberate breath, she softened her voice and spoke again. "Officer, please listen to me. I'm not a threat. I'm here on official business. You can confirm my identity if you'll just let me reach for my badge." This time, Marcus seemed to waver slightly. He glanced at the growing crowd, then back at Laura. For a split second, doubt flickered across his face. Was he wrong about her? Could this really be a misunderstanding? But just as quickly as the thought entered his mind, it was pushed aside by years of ingrained caution. What if she was lying? What if letting her grab something from her bag gave her the chance to pull out a weapon instead? He couldn't afford to take that risk. The standoff dragged on, each passing moment stretching the tension thinner and thinner. Laura, sensing that Marcus wasn't going to back down anytime soon, decided to try a different approach. "Look," she said, her voice firmer now. "You're making a mistake. I'm not here to cause trouble. If you don't believe me, call your supervisor. They'll vouch for me." Her suggestion caught Marcus off guard. Reaching for his radio would mean taking his focus away from Laura, even for a brief moment, and in his current state of heightened alertness, that felt like an unacceptable risk. Still, the idea of verifying her story appealed to him. It was a way to resolve the situation without resorting to drastic measures. After a long pause, he finally responded. "Fine," he said gruffly, "but don't move a muscle until I've confirmed who you are." With that, Marcus reached for his radio clipped to his belt, his eyes never leaving Laura. He barked out a quick message to dispatch, requesting verification of an FBI agent in the area. As he waited for a response, the crowd continued to watch in stunned silence. Some recorded videos capturing every detail of the confrontation, while others simply stared in disbelief. Among them was a young mother clutching her toddler's hand tightly, her face pale with worry. Nearby, an elderly man leaned heavily on his cane, muttering under his breath about how things like this didn't happen in Ridgewood, at least not until today. Minutes ticked by agonizingly slowly. When dispatch finally came back with confirmation that an FBI agent matching Laura's description was indeed in town, Marcus visibly relaxed, but only slightly. Lowering his weapon, he took a step back and gestured for Laura to retrieve her badge. She did so carefully, pulling it out of her bag and holding it up for him to see. "There," she said, her voice tinged with both relief and frustration. "Now do you believe me?" Marcus studied the badge closely, his jaw tightening as he realized the enormity of what had just happened. He had drawn his weapon on a federal agent, a member of the very system he swore to uphold. The weight of his actions hit him like a ton of bricks, and for the first time since entering the supermarket, he felt a pang of shame. Clearing his throat, he nodded stiffly. "My apologies, Agent Hayes," he said, his voice quieter now. "I thought you were someone else." Laura didn't respond immediately. Instead, she slipped her badge back into her bag and straightened up, her expression unreadable. She understood that mistakes happened, but this went beyond a simple error in judgment. This was reckless, dangerous, and completely avoidable. And yet, as angry as she felt, she also recognized the importance of handling the situation professionally. "We need to talk about this," she said finally, her tone firm but measured. "But not here. Too many people are watching." Marcus nodded again, his face flushed with embarrassment. Together, they moved toward a quieter corner of the supermarket, away from the prying eyes of the crowd. As they walked, Laura couldn't help but notice the murmurs following them, whispers of disbelief, curiosity, and even outrage. Word of the incident would spread quickly, she knew, fueled by the videos and photos already circulating online. By the time they reached the relative privacy of the corner, the damage to both their reputations had likely already begun. Standing face to face, Laura crossed her arms and fixed Marcus with a hard stare. "Do you have any idea how serious this is?" she asked, her voice low but intense. "You pointed a loaded gun at a federal agent. That's not just a breach of protocol. It's a criminal act." Marcus swallowed hard, his earlier confidence replaced by unease. "I didn't know who you were," he stammered. "I thought you were casing the place. I was just doing my job." "Your job doesn't give you the right to escalate a situation based on assumptions," Laura shot back, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "If you had listened to me from the beginning, if you had given me a chance to explain, we wouldn't be standing here right now." The truth of her words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. He wanted to defend himself, to justify his actions, but deep down, he knew she was right. He had acted impulsively, letting his instincts override common sense. Now he would have to face the consequences of his decision, not just legally but personally as well. For several long moments, neither of them spoke. The weight of the situation hung heavy in the air, a stark reminder of how fragile trust could be even among those who shared the same mission of protecting others. As they stood there surrounded by the quiet hum of the supermarket and the lingering stares of curious onlookers, both Marcus and Laura realized that this encounter would leave a lasting impact, one that neither of them could escape anytime soon. The supermarket had transformed into something unrecognizable. What began as a quiet Saturday morning errand had spiraled into a spectacle that felt more like a scene from a movie than real life. The aisles, once filled with the soft hum of shopping, carts and casual chatter, were now buzzing with tension. Shoppers huddled together in small groups, whispering furiously about what they had just witnessed. Some held their phones aloft, recording every detail of the standoff between Officer Marcus Kane and FBI agent Laura Hayes. Others simply stood frozen, wide-eyed, and unsure of what to do next. As Marcus and Laura moved to a quieter corner of the store, the crowd didn't disperse. Instead, it seemed to grow larger, drawn by the drama unfolding before them. A teenage boy filmed the entire incident on his phone, his hands shaking slightly as he zoomed in on Marcus's face. "This is insane," he muttered to his friend, who nodded silently, her eyes glued to the screen. Across the room, an elderly woman clutched her purse tightly, muttering under her breath about how she'd never seen anything like this in all her years living in Ridgewood. Meanwhile, outside the supermarket, word of the confrontation was spreading fast. A young mother leaving the store after paying for her groceries stopped abruptly when she saw the commotion inside. She quickly snapped a photo through the glass doors and posted it on social media with the caption, "Something crazy happening at the grocery store. Cops involved?" Within minutes, the post garnered dozens of likes and comments, with people speculating wildly about what might have happened. Was it a robbery? A hostage situation? No one knew for sure, but everyone wanted answers. Back inside, Marcus and Laura stood in the corner, their conversation tense but subdued. Though they were no longer in the center of the chaos, the weight of the situation loomed heavily over them. Laura's frustration was evident in the way she crossed her arms tightly across her chest, her jaw clenched as she spoke. "You need to understand the gravity of what you've done," she said, her voice low but firm. "This isn't just some minor misunderstanding. Pointing a gun at a federal agent is a serious offense. People could have gotten hurt." Marcus shifted uncomfortably, his face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and defensiveness. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. How could he possibly explain himself without sounding like he was making excuses? He glanced around the store, noticing the sea of faces watching him intently. Some looked sympathetic, while others wore expressions of anger or disbelief. It was clear that the public opinion of him was already forming, and it wasn't favorable. "I didn't mean for things to go this far," Marcus finally managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I was doing the right thing. Protecting people." Laura let out a sharp exhale, shaking her head. "Protecting people doesn't mean jumping straight to pulling your weapon," she replied. It means using your training to assess situations carefully and make smart decisions. You assumed the worst about me without giving me a chance to explain myself. That's not protection, that's recklessness. Her words stung, but Marcus knew they were true. He replayed the events in his mind, trying to pinpoint where exactly he had gone wrong. Had he been too quick to judge? Too eager to assert authority? Or was it simply a case of bad timing and miscommunication? Whatever the reason the damage was done, his actions, or rather his reaction, had turned a routine trip to the supermarket into a national headline. As if on cue, the sound of sirens pierced the air. Moments later, 2 patrol cars and an unmarked vehicle screeched to a halt in the parking lot outside. Officers poured into the supermarket, their presence immediately drawing the attention of the crowd. One of them approached Marcus and Laura, his expression stern. "What's going on here?" he demanded, glancing between the two of them. Laura stepped forward, her tone professional but clipped. "Agent Laura Hayes, FBI," she said, flashing her badge. "I was confronted by this officer," she gestured toward Marcus, "who drew his weapon on me without cause. I've already confirmed my identity, but the situation needs to be documented properly." The officer nodded, jotting down notes, as he listened. Then he turned to Marcus, his gaze piercing. "Is this true?" he asked. Marcus hesitated, his pride warring with the reality of the situation. Finally, he nodded. "Yes," he admitted reluctantly, "but I believed she was a potential threat at the time." The officer raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "We'll need statements from both of you," he said. "And trust me, this isn't going to end here. There will be an investigation." The news sent a fresh wave of anxiety coursing through Marcus. An investigation meant scrutiny, not just from his superiors, but from the public as well. By now, the videos of the incident had likely made their way online, and there was no telling how far they would spread. Already, snippets of the confrontation were popping up on social media platforms, accompanied by hashtags like Sauerangst Cop vs FBI and Sauerangst Law Enforcement Fail. Comment sections erupted with heated debates, with some defending Marcus's actions as justified, caution and others condemning him as reckless and incompetent. For Laura, the fallout was equally daunting. While she understood that mistakes could happen, the fact remained that she had been placed in a dangerous situation because of someone else's poor judgment. As a federal agent, she was accustomed to dealing with high-pressure scenarios. But this was different. This wasn't a criminal mastermind or a violent suspect, it was another member of law enforcement, someone who should have known better. The betrayal of trust cut deep, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the incident reflected broader issues within the system. As the officers began taking statements and interviewing witnesses, the atmosphere in the supermarket remained charged. Shoppers lingered reluctantly, torn between curiosity and discomfort. Some expressed sympathy for Marcus, arguing that he was only doing his job under stressful circumstances. Others sided firmly with Laura, criticizing him for escalating the situation unnecessarily. Among them was a middle-aged man who had been shopping for produce when the incident occurred. He had no business pointing a gun at her, the man declared loudly, earning nods of agreement from those around him. "She's a federal agent, for crying out loud. If he can't tell the difference between a suspect and someone on our side, maybe he shouldn't be carrying a weapon." Not everyone shared this view, however. A younger woman nearby chimed in, her tone defensive. "You don't know what he was thinking," she argued. "Maybe he thought she was armed. Maybe he saved us from something worse. We weren't there. We don't know." The debate raged on, reflecting the divided opinions that would soon dominate discussions across town and beyond. For Ridgewood, a community known for its tight-knit bonds and peaceful existence, the incident was shocking and unsettling. It forced residents to confront uncomfortable questions about trust, accountability, and the role of law enforcement in their daily lives. By the time the initial reports were filed and the officers departed, the supermarket had emptied significantly. Those who remained did so reluctantly, casting wary glances at Marcus as he stood near the exit, looking utterly defeated. His mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. internal investigations, disciplinary hearings, and possibly even legal consequences. Would he lose his job over this? Worse yet, would he face criminal charges? Laura, meanwhile, walked briskly toward her car, her emotions swirling in a tangled mess. On one hand, she felt vindicated. Her identity had been confirmed and the incident had been documented. On the other hand, she couldn't shake the lingering sense of unease. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. Law enforcement officers were supposed to work together, not against each other. Yet here she was, caught in the aftermath of a confrontation that should never have happened in the first place. As she slid behind the wheel of her car and started the engine, Laura glanced back at the supermarket one last time. The image of Marcus standing there looking lost and overwhelmed stayed with her long after she drove away. She knew this wasn't the end of the story, for either of them. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, both personal and professional. But as she merged onto the highway, heading toward her next assignment, she resolved to use this experience as a reminder of why communication and trust mattered so much in their line of work. For Marcus, the drive home was equally somber. The familiar streets of Ridgewood passed by in a blur as he replayed the day's events in his mind. He thought about the faces of the shoppers, the whispers of the crowd, and the cold, hard truth that he had let his instincts override his better judgment. As he pulled into his driveway and stepped out of the car, he felt the full weight of his actions settle over him like a heavy blanket. This was just the beginning of a long and difficult journey, one that would test his resilience, humility, and ability to learn from his mistakes. And so, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet town, both Marcus and Laura found themselves grappling with the same sobering realization. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought against criminals or threats. They're fought within ourselves, as we strive to reconcile who we are with who we want to be. By the time the sun rose on Monday morning, the incident at the supermarket had already become the talk of Ridgewood, and far beyond. Social media platforms were flooded with videos and photos of the confrontation between Officer Marcus Kane and FBI agent Laura Hayes. The hashtags Charn Cop vs FBI and Long Supermarket Standoff trended locally before spreading like wildfire across the internet. News outlets picked up the story, turning what had started as a quiet Saturday errand into a national spectacle. For Marcus, waking up to the reality of the situation was nothing short of surreal. As he scrolled through his phone over a cup of lukewarm coffee, he saw headlines plastered across every major news website. Local cop points gun at federal agent, law enforcement clash sparks outrage, and did this officer cross the line? Each article painted him in an increasingly negative light, accompanied by screenshots of bystander videos that captured his tense standoff with Laura. Comment sections were ablaze with opinions, ranging from harsh condemnation to tepid defense. Some commenters called him reckless, accusing him of abusing his power and putting innocent lives at risk. Others labeled him incompetent, questioning how someone entrusted with protecting the public could make such a grave error in judgment. A few defended him, arguing that he was simply doing his job under uncertain circumstances. But even those supportive voices were drowned out by the overwhelming tide of criticism. For Marcus, reading these comments felt like being punched repeatedly in the gut. He knew he had made a mistake, but seeing it dissected and debated by strangers online made the weight of his actions feel unbearable. Meanwhile, Laura woke up to a different kind of storm. Her phone buzzed incessantly with notifications, emails from her superiors, messages from colleagues, and alerts about mentions of her name online. While she hadn't asked for any of this attention, there was no denying that the incident had thrust her into the spotlight. Some praised her composure during the confrontation, calling her a hero for remaining calm under pressure. Others speculated about whether she should have handled things differently, suggesting that her decision to reach for her badge might have contributed to the escalation. The scrutiny wasn't limited to social media. Local news stations sent reporters to interview shoppers who had witnessed the event firsthand. One woman, clutching a reusable tote bag, described the scene as terrifying. Another man wearing a baseball cap told a reporter, "I thought I was going to see someone get shot right there in front of me." Their accounts, while dramatic, only added fuel to the fire, amplifying the narrative of chaos and mistrust. Back at the police department, things weren't much better. Internal Affairs launched an immediate investigation into Marcus's conduct, placing him on administrative leave pending their findings. His colleagues, once friendly and supportive, now avoided eye contact when they passed him in the hallway. Some whispered behind closed doors, speculating about whether he'd be fired or face criminal charges. Others tried to offer words of encouragement, but their attempts fell flat against the backdrop of mounting pressure. Marcus attended a meeting with his union representative, who listened patiently as he recounted the events leading up to the confrontation. "It's not looking good," the representative admitted after hearing the details. "You drew your weapon on a federal agent in a public place. That's going to raise a lot of red flags." "I know," Marcus replied, running a hand over his face. "But I honestly believed she was a threat. If I hadn't acted and something bad had happened." The representative held up a hand, cutting him off. "Intent doesn't matter here. What matters is perception. And right now the perception is that you overreacted. We'll do our best to mitigate the damage, but you need to prepare yourself for the possibility of serious consequences." Those words lingered in Marcus's mind long after the meeting ended. He returned home feeling hollow, unsure of what the future held. Would he lose his badge? Would he go to jail? These questions haunted him day and night, making it impossible to focus on anything else. For Laura, the fallout was equally challenging. Though she had filed a formal complaint against Marcus, she found herself grappling with mixed emotions. On one hand, she believed accountability was necessary, not just for Marcus's sake, but for the integrity of law enforcement as a whole. On the other hand, she couldn't ignore the fact that Marcus was a human being who had made a mistake. She knew all too well how high-pressure situations could cloud judgment, having faced similar challenges herself during her career. Her superiors, however, left little room for nuance. They viewed the incident as a black mark on interagency relations and demanded swift action. "This can't happen again," her boss said during a private meeting. "We need to send a message that this kind of behavior won't be tolerated." Laura nodded, understanding the stakes. Still, she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that the situation was spiraling out of control. Every news segment, every viral tweet, every heated debate seemed to widen the divide between local police and federal agents. It was as if the entire system was fracturing before her eyes, and she wasn't sure how or if it could ever be repaired. As days turned into weeks, the story continued to dominate headlines. Talk shows invited experts to weigh in on the incident, dissecting everything from Marcus's training to the broader issue of trust within law enforcement. Some argued that the confrontation highlighted systemic problems, pointing to a lack of communication and coordination between agencies. Others used it as an opportunity to criticize law enforcement as a whole, calling for sweeping reforms. In Ridgewood, the community was deeply divided. At town hall meetings, residents voiced their opinions passionately. Some called for Marcus to be reinstated, insisting that he deserved a second chance. Others demanded stricter oversight, fearing that unchecked authority could lead to more incidents like this one. The mayor issued a statement urging calm, but it did little to quell the growing tension. For Marcus, the constant attention became suffocating. Everywhere he went, people stared, pointed, or whispered. Even trips to the gas station or pharmacy felt like walking through a gauntlet of judgment. Friends stopped inviting him to gatherings, and neighbors avoided crossing paths with him. The isolation was crushing, leaving him feeling like an outsider in the very town he had sworn to protect. One evening, unable to bear the silence in his apartment any longer, Marcus decided to take a walk. The cool night air offered a brief reprieve from the chaos swirling around him. As he strolled past familiar landmarks, the park where kids played soccer, the diner where locals gathered for breakfast, he allowed himself to reflect on how drastically his life had changed in such a short time. Just a few weeks ago, he had been a respected officer with a clear sense of purpose. Now he was a pariah, struggling to find meaning in the wreckage of his career. Despite the darkness looming over him, Marcus couldn't help but notice small moments of kindness. A teenager jogging past gave him a nod of acknowledgement. An elderly couple sitting on their porch smiled warmly as he walked by. These tiny gestures reminded him that not everyone had turned their backs on him, and that maybe, just maybe, redemption was still possible. Across town, Laura wrestled with her own feelings of frustration and uncertainty. While she remained committed to her work, the incident lingered in the back of her mind like an open wound. She couldn't forget the look on Marcus's face as he lowered his weapon, a mixture of shame, confusion, and regret. It was a reminder that even in moments of conflict, humanity often found a way to shine through. As the investigation dragged on, both Marcus and Laura braced themselves for whatever came next. They knew the road ahead would be difficult, filled with tough decisions and hard truths, but deep down, they also knew that this experience had revealed something important: the fragility of trust, not just between individuals, but within the larger framework of justice and accountability. And as painful as it was, perhaps that revelation was the first step toward healing, for themselves and for the fractured world they served. As the weeks dragged on, the legal ramifications of the supermarket incident began to take shape. What had started as a local controversy quickly escalated into a full-blown legal battle, drawing attention not only from Ridgewood, but also from state and federal authorities. For Marcus Kane, the weight of the situation grew heavier with each passing day. The internal investigation conducted by his department concluded that his actions were excessive and inconsistent with proper protocol, paving the way for formal charges to be filed against him. Federal prosecutors wasted no time stepping in. They argued that pointing a firearm at a federal agent was not just a breach of conduct, it was a criminal act that warranted serious consequences. Marcus was charged with aggravated assault and misuse of authority, both felonies that carried significant penalties. News of the indictment spread rapidly, reigniting public interest in the case and further polarizing opinions about what should happen next. Some viewed the charges as excessive, believing that Marcus's intentions, however misguided, didn't justify such severe punishment. Others saw them as long overdue, arguing that holding law enforcement accountable was essential for maintaining trust in the system. For Marcus, the news hit like a freight train. Sitting in his lawyer's office, he stared blankly at the documents outlining the charges against him. Each word felt like a hammer blow: aggravated assault, criminal negligence, endangerment of civilians. His lawyer, a seasoned defense attorney named Daniel Harper, tried to reassure him. "We've got options," Harper said, leaning forward in his chair. "This isn't a lost cause. We'll argue that you acted out of genuine concern for public safety." Marcus nodded slowly, though he wasn't convinced. Genuine concern or not, the facts were undeniable. He had drawn his weapon on a federal agent in a crowded supermarket. No amount of justification could erase that reality. Still, Harper laid out their strategy. They would focus on mitigating factors: Marcus's otherwise spotless record, his years of dedicated service, and the fact that no one had been physically harmed during the incident. They would also emphasize the role of miscommunication in escalating the situation, framing it as a tragic misunderstanding rather than an intentional act of aggression. On the other side of the table, federal prosecutors prepared their case with equal intensity. Their argument centered on accountability. Law enforcement officers are held to a higher standard because they carry weapons and wield immense power, Assistant U.S. Attorney Rachel Meyer told her team during a strategy meeting. When someone abuses that power, it undermines public confidence in the entire system. We need to send a clear message that this kind of behavior won't be tolerated. Meyer's approach was methodical. She gathered evidence meticulously, including witness testimonies, surveillance footage from the supermarket, and expert analysis of police protocols. She even consulted with behavioral psychologists to demonstrate how Marcus's actions deviated from accepted practices in high-pressure situations. Her goal was simple but daunting: secure a conviction that would serve as a precedent for future cases involving similar misconduct. As preparations for the trial intensified, the media frenzy reached new heights. Reporters camped outside Marcus's home and the courthouse where pretrial hearings were scheduled. Television anchors debated the merits of the case late into the night, inviting legal experts and former law enforcement officers to weigh in. Social media exploded with commentary, hashtags like "Justice for FBI" and "Support Our Cops" trending simultaneously. It seemed everyone had an opinion, whether informed or not. The pressure took its toll on Marcus. Sleep became elusive, replaced by restless nights spent staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of that fateful Saturday over and over again. He avoided going out unless absolutely necessary, fearing the judgmental stares and whispered insults. Even routine tasks like grocery shopping felt unbearable now. One afternoon, while picking up essentials at a convenience store, he overheard two customers discussing the upcoming trial. "He deserves whatever he gets," one of them said loudly enough for Marcus to hear. "What if someone had gotten hurt? What then?" The comment stung, but Marcus forced himself to keep moving. He couldn't afford to let anger or self-pity consume him, not when so much was at stake. Instead, he channeled his energy into preparing for court. Harper drilled him relentlessly, rehearsing potential questions and answers until Marcus could recite them in his sleep. They reviewed every detail of the incident, dissecting his thought process and identifying areas where his testimony might be challenged. Despite the grueling preparation, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that no amount of practice would fully prepare him for facing a jury and the world on trial. Laura Hayes, too, found herself caught in the whirlwind leading up to the trial. Though she hadn't sought the spotlight, her role as the central figure in the prosecution's case made her a target of intense scrutiny. Journalists hounded her for interviews, bloggers speculated about her motives, and conspiracy theorists concocted wild theories about why she had been at the supermarket that day. Some accused her of deliberately provoking Marcus to make a point about federal authority. Others suggested she had mishandled the situation, escalating tensions unnecessarily. To her credit, Laura handled the attention with grace and professionalism. She cooperated fully with investigators, providing detailed statements and participating in mock cross-examinations to ensure her testimony would hold up under scrutiny. Privately, however, she struggled with guilt. While she believed Marcus needed to face consequences for his actions, she couldn't help but feel sympathy for him. She knew firsthand how stressful and unpredictable law enforcement work could be, and yet the stakes were too high to ignore. Trust between agencies, and between law enforcement and the public, depended on accountability. If Marcus walked away without repercussions, it would set a dangerous precedent. As the trial date approached, tensions in Ridgewood reached a boiling point. Town hall meetings turned contentious, with residents passionately debating the merits of prosecuting Marcus versus offering leniency. Local businesses plastered signs in their windows urging unity and understanding, though few seemed willing to extend forgiveness. Meanwhile, Marcus's family rallied around him, attending every hearing and speaking out in his defense whenever possible. His younger sister, Emily, gave an emotional interview to a local news station, pleading for compassion. "My brother is not a bad person," she said, tears streaming down her face. "He made a mistake, a big one, but he doesn't deserve to have his life ruined over it." Despite the support, Marcus couldn't escape the sinking feeling that the odds were stacked against him. On the morning of the trial, as he sat in the courtroom surrounded by lawyers, reporters, and curious spectators, he braced himself for what promised to be the most difficult experience of his life. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that comes before a storm. As the judge entered and called the court to order, Marcus took a deep breath, reminding himself to stay focused. Whatever happened next, he vowed to face it head-on. Across the aisle, Laura sat quietly, her expression unreadable. She glanced briefly at Marcus, catching his eye for a fleeting moment before looking away. There was no animosity in her gaze, only a quiet resolve. Both of them understood that the outcome of the trial would shape not only their futures, but also the broader conversation about accountability and trust within law enforcement. As the proceedings began, the room fell silent. Every pair of eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. For better or worse, history was being written, one verdict at a time.